Hello, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm doing another monthly roundup. I won't be doing one in July because it will be publication month and I'll be busy doing a bunch of other stuff. So today I'm just doing a quick catch up on where things are and what's been happening since I did this 4 weeks ago. To be honest, the last few months have been really challenging. There's been a lot of stuff going on, in my personal life that's made it a really difficult time. I've been trying to write book 3 and that's been a lot of added pressure, at the same time doing build up and promotion for the launch of the Judas Blossom. As I said last month, I've done even more interviews, I've done more articles, more press releases. I've got an interview this week, I've got 2 the week after that, I've got some more the week after that, and believe it or not, I've actually got some events and other things booked in September and 2 or 3 things in October now. So, months after the fact that the book has come out, there's still things going on. Only now, 8 years on from when my debut book came out, people are discovering me. An overnight success, 10 years in the making. Sometimes these things happen and people come across you for whatever reason with your latest book and hopefully go back and then read the rest of your back catalogue. I think I've said this in a couple of other places, but someone like John Gwynne, he's been publishing books for nearly a decade, if not a bit longer, when Malice first came out, and some people have just discovered him with Shadow of the Gods, the first in his new trilogy, and then they've said, oh, has he done anything else? And they've gone back and realised he did Fateful and the Fallen, 7 books, 4 books in the first series and 3 in the trilogy that followed, and then they're going and reading all of his books, and he's had a massive kind of resurgence, and his popularity, I would say, has become even more popular in the last few years than he was previously. So is that going to happen with me? I have no idea. This is the biggest thing and the biggest challenge of being an author, whether you're traditional or self-published really, is you work on the book, you do the best that you can, you edit it within an inch of its life, other people work on it, you go over it again and again and again, you put all this work in promotion and, building up awareness, but there is so much out there. There is so much noise, so many books, but then so many other distractions as well that keep people focused on other things, whether it's games or TV or film. And now, of course, with streaming, I'm as guilty as everybody else of doing this. It's so easy when you're tired after work, and reading is not a passive thing. It's much more engaging just to put on a TV show, put on a film, sit back and just watch it, and you just kind of let it wash over you. Reading requires a lot more. So getting the word out, getting people to engage, getting people to pick it up is the real challenge. With that in mind, I have put a link down below with links to all the places you can pre-order the book or order it if you're listening to this after the date of publication. So if you're in the UK, you can get signed and personalised copies. If you're outside the UK, unfortunately, that's not possible yet, but there are the links to the usual places, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Waterstones in the UK, and so on. Independent bookshops, of course. This is Independent Bookshop Month, so if you can support them, or if in the UK you can support Book, who are doing the signed versions, then that would be great. So even though all the writing is completely done for book 1, and it has been for months now, there's still all of the hard work that goes into promoting it. And of course, at the same time, edits on book 2 will be due very, very soon. And I'm working on book 3 now. And my deadline is Christmas. And I'm on track. I've had a few bumps in the road. A few things have slowed me down just being so busy. But I'm not worried. I've gone over my notes again. I've broken things down. I've looked at the passage of the story, but also the arcs of the characters and how to make it tie up in a satisfying way, and I'm much happier now. The challenge with writing this trilogy, the toughest thing I would say for me is that because I'm mixing fact and fiction, sometimes it requires a lot of research. Just earlier this week, I was trying to have one character travel from point A to point B, and of course this is in the year like 1263, 1264. How would they do it? How would they get there? What's a feasible way to do it? They can't just get on a horse and ride. Well, they could, but it would take them months, and I can't just have them skip the story for months and then come back. So I needed to find another way to get them from point A to point B that was faster. And also, was that actually possible in that period? So I spent an hour and a half, nearly 2 hours researching something so I could type this thing in that'll be 2 short paragraphs, and that's it. A reader will just read it and go, okay, great, yeah, and carry on. Whereas that took 2 hours to do. And even though this book is historic fantasy, it still has to feel realistic up to a point. There are some things I have changed that are not historically accurate. And I've done this on purpose. There are some things that are fantastic and therefore I brought in that didn't exist. So blending the two together in a way that feels satisfying, that works, is going to be a challenge. I know some of the stuff will trip some people up who are more knowledgeable about this period in history than me, and I can't really help that. That's just a case of I have to keep reminding them that it is fiction, it is historic fantasy, and maybe I'll blame any mistakes on a wizard, not the fact that my research didn't take me years, it took me hours or perhaps weeks. And, I've only read half a dozen books on this period. I haven't studied it because at the end of the day, I want to tell a good story. I'm not interested in just doing an historic retelling. There are some parts of the book and the whole series that are quite complicated, and the fact that there are a lot of moving parts, but there are also a lot of characters. And the more you introduce, the more difficult it is for the reader to keep track, especially when it's something that they're completely unfamiliar with. So there is a list of characters in the back of the book that tells you who they are and to help you get familiar. But I've also omitted certain things. There are certain phrases, certain words that would be used for different things in this era, and I've chosen to use a more modern version simply because it makes it less of a challenge for the reader to understand what's going on. So in addition to all these strange names and strange countries, if I then start introducing a lot of strange terms as well, it's just putting up more hurdles in a way. And if you think about, a reader like a runner going down the track, and every time you put a hurdle in, they have to slow down a little bit, and then they can pick up the pace again and slow down a bit. And if there's too many, they're just never going to get to the end. And, some people are happy with that. But at the end of the day, I am writing a fantasy novel. I still want it to be fun. I want it to be enjoyable. And I'm not there to just lecture them about this period in history. I'm not writing a history book. There's also a map in the front of the book too, so that you can see what areas of the world I'm talking about. Where possible, I kind of repeat certain things, countries or cities, to remind people of where characters are, because we cover a massive part of the world in the story. The Mongol Empire covered a huge portion of the known world in that period, and even though I'm only focused on one area, we do talk about other places too. So there's a lot of things to keep track of really in the story. And the more research I do on the period, the more interesting things I find out. Like, obviously in today's 21st century, we're so connected in every possible way with the internet and social media and our smartphones. But even back then, there were some strange connections. So the fact that the great Khan would send a letter to the Pope in Rome, essentially telling him that he has to submit to his rule and to be prepared to, bow down because he's going to rule the whole world. They wrote to the King of France, they wrote to, England. So even though the letters would have taken a long time to get there, the world was a lot more connected than I had realized. So it is fascinating for me. And I'm trying to bring some of the joy of the research of what I found to the story, some of the interesting facts. But there again, I don't want it just to be full of facts that are really boring and tedious. So when I found something out that's relevant to the story, I introduce it. I don't just put a load of stuff in there because of the fact that I've done the research and now you're going to have to read it too. It's not relevant to the story. It just doesn't go in the book. Like, I've got a world Bible of stuff for this book. And it's, if you think of it like an iceberg, they say something like only 10% of the iceberg is visible above the surface of the water, and the rest of it is all down below. And you never see it, you may never get to it, but it's there. And that's essentially what I've done with every book. There's a whole load of stuff that's in the background, stuff to do with characters, motivations, where they come from, their family. And then there's all the research with this trilogy as well that ties in to the story, whether it's historic or whether it's something else that I've introduced that's completely made up. There's always a lot more than ends up on the page, because it would otherwise be about 1,000-page novel, and that's just not something I do. And also, nobody wants to read a history book of made-up stuff. Well, some do, but that's not something I'm going to write. On top of all of this, I've already been thinking about what's next. I've been making notes. I've been working on pictures. I've got 3 pictures ready for potentially 3 standalones, which is what I think I want to do next. I'm going to move away from historic fantasy because it's been so exhausting and so tiring, and I also need a break from a long-running series. So I'm going to try the idea of standalones with series potential, where I could revisit the same world and the same characters, but on another adventure. At least 2 of the 3 that I'm going to pitch have that as a possibility. Whether or not my agent goes for it, whether or not the publisher goes for it, we will see. I've written some sample chapters for one of them, and that would be the first book I would potentially work on. I have ideas and notes for the others, and I could talk that through with my publisher and my editor, and if they're then interested, I can start to flesh them out whilst working on that first book. So potentially later this year, I'll begin writing that first novel. And in theory, if all goes to plan, it would come out in 2026, because Judas Book 2 is next year, and the following year, 2025, will be Judas Book 3. Traditional publishing is slow, but you begin to realize with everything else that's going on, unless you're writing full time, there are a lot of things that are always overlapping, not just working on one book, but then you're editing the next one and you're potentially promoting a third book, and that's just over the space of 3 years. But in addition to that, you're then having to work and pitch on what's next. And this is, of course, if you're producing a book every year. Some don't do that, and if you're in self-publishing, you're doing it a lot faster, on top of having a day job, a family, spending some time to take some time off, have some hobbies, have a life outside of all of this. So it is a constant juggling act for all of these different things, and it does take up a lot of time and a lot of energy. And oh yeah, having a YouTube channel and doing videos to talk about writing, which I love doing, and I love talking to people, and I love getting questions, but it's something else as well that's obviously takes time. So I'm not going to do an update video next month. I'm going to be busy promoting the book and doing a whole bunch of other stuff. I might come back in August, maybe in September, and sort of talk about what's been happening, how it's been received, and that sort of thing. But for the meantime, that's all I'm going to talk about. I'll be back very soon with another video.